William Lane Craig introduced the Kalam Cosmological Argument, but his argument has weaknesses, and Muslim scholars corrected them. In 1979, Western philosophy discovered the Kalam Cosmological Argument. And this argument has attracted more philosophical debate over the existence of God than any other philosophical argument. It began with a Christian philosopher. His name is William or Bill Craig. He wrote a book called The Kalam Cosmological Argument, and that's what gave the argument its name. This is God's cosmos.
Why has it received so much attention?
Because of the Big Bang, and also because you're not allowed to bring God into science. We talked about that in previous episodes. We talked about Galileo, Copernicus, clockwork universe, Newton, deism, all of those things. So the Big Bang means the universe began to exist. The universe began to exist means that God exists. But you're not allowed to say that. It's a conversation that scientists don't want to have. What Bill Craig did was he used the Kalam Cosmological Argument to force a scientific conversation. But he didn't do it with scientists. He did it with philosophers. And because of what he did, it's now forcing a scientific conversation over the Big Bang and the existence of God. And that's why the argument has gained so much attention.
I remember from the last episode, you explained how the intuition of the fact that the universe began to exist is so easy and straightforward. Why do we even need a philosophical argument then?
Well, there have always been philosophers who have not wanted to believe in the God of Abraham, the God of the Jews, Christians, and Muslims. These philosophers, they developed philosophical arguments against the fact that the universe began to exist. Because if you say the universe began to exist, then God is a straightforward conclusion. So these philosophical arguments, they appeared complex, they appeared logical, and to the average person, it looks like philosophers have shown that the universe didn't begin to exist, there's no need for God anymore. The scholars of Kalam, they had to learn the philosophical terminology of their opponents. They had to understand the arguments that they were making, and they had to use their own language, their own questions, to show that the universe did begin to exist. They had to do that to show to the intellectuals of the time that philosophically, logically, the universe did begin to exist. And that made the argument more complex. But it's not complex because it's difficult to prove that the universe began to exist. It's more complex because the objections of the philosophers who they were talking to are complex. That's where the philosophical Kalam argument comes from, and that's why we need the philosophical argument.
What did the objection of these classical philosophers look like?
Do you remember I showed you why you can't count an infinite quantity of time?
Yes, you explained that as long as you can keep adding moments, you haven't reached infinity, because you can always just add one more, like the did not, did to example.
Yes. So the philosophers would agree with that, but they would say that it applies in one direction. So in the direction of the present, you have a past, you're moving forward towards the direction of the present. In the direction of now, time ends. It just ended, and then it ended again. The present moment keeps on vanishing. So they agree that time in the direction of the present is finite, it ends. But they said that if you keep on going backwards in time, you keep on going, you keep on going, you keep on going, they said that you never come to a point that's the first point. They said you can keep on going forever.
On what basis did they say that though?
It's related to their entire philosophy. How about I just explain one of the Mutakallimun's responses to their objection. So the Aristotelians believed that everything in the heavens is moving in circles. And they believed that different things, they move at different speeds. I'm going to give you an example. Don't get distracted by the details of the example. The point is just to illustrate that anything that can be counted as a quantity, and quantities cannot be infinite because you can always add one to them, as we showed in the last video. The reason why Muslim scholars use this example is because the Aristotelian philosophers they were talking to admitted that things in the universe move in circles at different speeds. And Muslim scholars used that admission against them to show that they have to then admit that the universe began to exist. Imam al-Ghazali, one of my favorite scholars, he used this to show that the universe could not have existed forever, that it had to have a beginning in time. This is what he did. Let's take Earth. Earth goes around the sun in 1 year, 1 Earth year. Mercury goes around the sun 4 times the speed of Earth. So when Earth has gone around the sun once, Mercury will have gone around it 4 times. At any given time, Mercury will have made 4 times as many orbits around the sun as Earth. And that's only possible if the number of orbits of Earth and Mercury are finite. In order for the number of orbits of Mercury to be 4 times the orbits of Earth, the number of orbits of Earth needs to have a beginning and it needs to have an end. And the number of orbits of Mercury needs to have a beginning and it needs to have an end. And the number of Mercury's orbits needs to be 4 times the number of the orbits of Earth. If they're unlimited, if they're unbounded, then you can't say that the number of orbits of Mercury is 4 times the number of orbits of Earth.
I watched a little bit of Bill Craig. He also uses the example of Hilbert's hotel to illustrate the impossibility of an infinite past.
He does. Let's watch it.
He invites us to imagine a hotel that has an infinite number of rooms in it. Moreover, he says, imagine that every room is occupied. Now, Hilbert says, suppose somebody shows up at the guest registry wanting to check in. The proprietor says, of course, no problem. And he moves the person who was in room 1 into room 2. The person who was in room 2, he puts in room 3. The person who was in room 3, he puts in room 4, on out to infinity. As a result, room 1 now becomes vacant and the new person is easily accommodated. And yet before he came, all the rooms were already full.
So what do you think?
I don't think it's a good argument.
Why not?
Let's take Aristotle. Aristotle would agree with Hilbert's hotel. He would say that it's impossible for there to be a hotel with an infinite number of rooms, because Hilbert's hotel is talking about a spatial infinity, an infinite space. And this is an infinity where all of the things that constitute the infinity, the points in space, they exist simultaneously at the same point in time. Aristotle, he said that when you're talking about an infinite collection where all of the things, they exist at the same point in time, he said that's impossible. Like Hilbert's hotel, he'd agree with that. But Aristotle believed the universe didn't begin to exist. Why? Because he said that there's a difference. He said that a temporal infinity, an infinite quantity of past events, is different. There's only one event that exists at any point in time. The present moment, now, it's gone. Now there's another now. Oops, that's gone too. Now there's another now. So when somebody says that the past is infinite, they're not saying that all of those infinite moments exist at the same point in time. So Aristotle, he said that it's possible. In fact, he made positive arguments for the beginninglessness of the universe. He said that's the case, but Hilbert's hotel is also okay. It doesn't undermine the argument for the beginning of the universe. Some modern philosophers, they actually criticize Bill. They say that he cites Aristotle for the impossibility of an actual infinite, but then he makes an argument that doesn't undermine Aristotle's belief in an infinite past. The Muslims, the mutakallimun, would not have made this argument because they were directly arguing against Aristotle. They understood what he was saying. They would have made a different argument.
Which one?
So the Muslim argument, it goes like this. It's a proof by contradiction. And it says that let's assume that the past is infinite. That means that from the present moment, you move back in time, that quantity is infinite. Let's take any moment in the past. So let's pick the year 1453. So let's go back from 1453 into the past. If you look at these two quantities, one is smaller than the other. It has to be. 1453 into the infinite past, it's smaller by 569 years. But if you say it's infinite, it means it's not smaller. Why not? Because you can take the present moment and put beside it the moment of 1453. And then you take the next moment just before this moment and put it before 1453. So what you do is you set up a one-to-one correspondence between the present time into the infinite past and between the time from 1453 into the infinite past. And for every moment in the longer interval, you can find a moment in the short interval. That means they're the same size. And that's a contradiction. So on one side, 1453 into the infinite past is smaller. On the other side, I say they're the same size. But it's impossible for something to be smaller than and the same size at the same time. That means there's something wrong. What was wrong? The initial assumption was wrong. The reason why I'm falling in a contradiction is because I assumed that the universe didn't begin to exist. The assumption that the universe didn't begin to exist lands me in this contradiction. Contradictions are impossible, therefore, the assumption is false. The universe, it began to exist. The general idea here is that it's impossible for a one-sided infinite quantity to exist. So the present is bounded, and you're arguing for a one-sided infinite quantity. And the reason why a one-sided infinite quantity is impossible is because if you take a subset of it, then it leads to a contradiction. That subset is smaller than the larger collection and equal to it at the same time. And that's impossible. Therefore, a one-sided infinite quantity is impossible.
That makes sense. But you have to follow the argument carefully.
Yes, you do. It's complex, but the complexity doesn't come from the inherent complexity of showing that the universe began to exist. It comes from the complexity of the objection. The fact that the universe began to exist, we can see intuitively, we can see it clearly. That's why we began with this intuitive grasping of the idea. When you put that in your mind and then you come here, then what's happening here is that the Muslims, the mutakallimun, they're showing with great precision something that you can already grasp intuitively. And it makes a lot more sense when you look at it in that way.
So why does Bill use the example of Hilbert's hotel if it's not a good example?
I think he gets mixed up because he's trying to navigate another debate. He's trying to talk to mathematicians. Mathematicians have invented this thing called set theory, and they argue that it entails that it's possible for the universe to have existed forever.
Let's examine that debate next.
Let's do it. If you like this episode, then check out my Why Islam is True course, in which I teach you 4 rational arguments that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ himself used to show that Islam is true. Learning on YouTube is great, but if you want to reach a learning goal, a learning destination, like how to make rational arguments, how to think critically as a Muslim, how to engage with modern science as a Muslim, then you need to follow a map that's been specifically designed to take you to your learning goal, step by step, through a series of carefully designed learning objectives and learning activities that take you to your final learning destination. That's how this course has been designed. This course shows you the what, the why, and the how. It shows you what we believe as Muslims. It shows you why those beliefs are based on evidence and 100% true based on Quranic rational arguments. and it shows you how to use those arguments to address common objections against Islam by atheists and others on topics such as evolution, the problem of evil, the age of Aisha, and much more. It consists of 20 modules, and it includes bi-weekly live sessions with me, pre-recorded lessons with 81 bite-sized videos, 247 application activities in real-world scenarios, a 24/7 community where you can ask a question and get it answered within 24 hours, and there's an option to buy a course textbook as well. Find out more at www.whyislamis.true/course and learn why Islamic seminaries are adopting this course as part of their curriculum to train the next generations of scholars. This course is actually the first and prerequisite course in the Basira classical curriculum in modern context, a 4-year curriculum consisting of 31 courses that will teach you everything that a Muslim needs to know about their deen and be ready for modern society. This 4-year Basira seminary curriculum is based entirely on the Muslim scholarly tradition, but it teaches you how to apply that tradition to the world in which we live, and it's taught completely in English. Why Islam is True is the first course in that 31-course curriculum. Check it out at www.whyislamistrue.com/course.